Today marks day 28 of the Iran war, and we seem to be seeing Iraq being pulled ever closer to the center of it. What are you seeing, Omar?
We're definitely seeing a trajectory that is worrisome. And some analysts are actually interpreting this week's development to mean that Iraq has officially joined the conflict as a belligerent.
Welcome to your Iraq briefing. I'm Erik Gustafson with Enabling Peace in Iraq Center, and I'm joined by my colleague, Omar Al-Nidawi. It's been a hectic week, Omar.
Indeed, it's been a lot of developments to cover, and few of them were anything close to good.
Yeah, yeah. So over the past week, we've read in your report, we've seen strikes across Anbar and Nineveh, attacks on Iraqi security forces and Iraq's national intelligence headquarters, cross-border escalation, and growing economic strain as oil flows are disrupted and tensions rise across the region. At the same time, we're seeing preparations for a potential ground war. The Pentagon is requesting another $200 billion from Congress, while two Marine Expeditionary Forces, the 11th and 31st, along with a brigade from the 82nd Airborne Division, are moving into the region. So today we're going to focus on four key questions. So to start things off, Omar, as we approach the 1 month mark since the start of this war, what's the situation in Iraq right now, and what are some of the most significant incidents that you reported this week?
Well, if I wanted to summarize the big picture situation in Iraq right now, I would say that the military spillover of the war is definitely intensifying and it's dragging Iraq closer into the conflict. And in the meantime, Baghdad is really struggling to balance its relations with the different internal and external stakeholders, especially the PMF, Iran, the United States, and of course also the Kurdistan region. At the same time, there are ethno-sectarian tensions that are being revived and stoked by bad actors, all while the economic risk is really skyrocketing for Iraq as oil exports are being bottlenecked through the Strait of Hormuz and nothing is coming out. So means also no money is coming back in. In terms of key incidents this week, there were a number of actually quite disturbing developments in Iraq. We saw an increase in U.S. Deadly attacks on the PMF, and there were several attacks on PMF bases as well as the guest houses of key PMF leaders, including Falih al-Fayyad, Rayan al-Kildani, and others. And one of the attacks in Anbar, on a base in Anbar, killed the PMF commander for the province. Perhaps more troubling was a two strikes that happened in 2 consecutive days on a base at Al Habbaniya. This is a an old, actually, Royal Air Force base in Habbaniya that is used both by the PMF and by the Iraqi army. So one of the strikes killed a number of PMF fighters, but the second strike, in fact, killed Iraqi soldiers and 7 Iraqi soldiers and wounded dozens, and put I think, a new level of strain on relations between Baghdad and Washington. At the same time, there was a cross-border attack from Iran with ballistic missiles, 6 ballistic missiles that hit 2 Peshmerga bases outside of Erbil and killed also 6 Peshmerga soldiers and wounded, I think, more than 30. So that was another troubling incident this week. And the picture is quite complicated. There are a lot of people shooting at each other, and this includes an attack in which the militia involvement is suspected. It is highly suspected. An attack by an explosive drone that targeted the headquarters of the Iraqi National Intelligence Service in central Baghdad, in Al Mansour, that killed an intelligence officer. Um, Kataib Hezbollah, which has a history, I think, a record of targeting INIS officers in the past, tried to distance itself from the attack and denied responsibility for it, but at the same time launched a scathing attack on the verbal attack on the INIS, accusing officers who are from the Iraqi Kurdish and Sunni communities of being agents for foreign intelligence, of being agents of the Mossad, of the CIA, of the Jordanian and Emirati intelligence agencies, and singled out a senior officer, a deputy commander, or a deputy chief of the INIS for being a foreign agent. And in fact, the Kata'ib Hezbollah tried to frame the attack as a an inside job by a corrupted intelligence officer who was trying to frame the militias or to smear the militias and blame the attack on them. So it's been quite an eventful week in terms of kinetic operations, so to speak, and a lot of casualties on all sides in this. And it's really put a lot of stress on Baghdad's relations with various stakeholders.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think one of the just to take a step back in understanding this for some viewers that are still trying to understand how this can happen within one country. Usually you have sovereignty, you have a monopoly of the use of force by the state, and the state operates on its own interests. But in Iraq, it's a little different. You have different power centers with their own interests, and you don't have a monopoly of power or a monopoly of the use of force in the classic
Exactly.
definition of sovereignty. So, how is Iraq's government, the current government, the caretaker government of Prime Minister Sadani, how is he managing this? And what do you make of the decision to authorize a response, authorizing the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, and the Iraqi security forces to respond to these attacks?
So I don't envy Baghdad's position or Sudani's position. He's trying to appease everyone while at the same time projecting that he's in power, that he's in control. So he's paid visits to both the PMF command. He was seen walking and talking with Falih al-Fayyad and Abu Fadek, the chairman and the chief of staff of the PMF, and defending the PMF and saying that the Iraqi government will not tolerate attacks on the PMF, calling it a cornerstone of Iraq's security structure. The next day or two, he went to units of the Iraqi, at the headquarters of units from the Iraqi army, saying basically similar things. Then he visited the INIS and sent his national security advisor to meet with exactly that senior officer that was accused by Kata'ib Hezbollah of being a foreign intelligence agent. And the same thing, he pledged to investigate the attacks and to bring those who perpetrated the attack to justice. So he's kind of going around trying to tell everyone that I will not accept attacks against you, and I will bring the perpetrators to justice, even when he's talking to the two sides that have attacked one another, and both are Iraqi. And of course, that's quite a peculiar situation that Baghdad has found itself in. Um, the authorization to respond that came from a meeting of the Ministerial Council of National Security in the aftermath of these attacks, and it basically said that the government authorizes the PMF and authorizes all other agencies or all other Iraqi security forces to act on the principle of self-defense and the right to respond or retaliate, depending on how you translate it, and to defend themselves if they are ever attacked. We alluded to this earlier. Some Iraq watchers and analysts have interpreted this as Iraq basically joining the conflict as a belligerent, that we're going to see the militias attacking U.S. interests with the Iraqi government's blessing. But I think it's probably a little less significant than that, practically in practical terms, because of the limited capacity, I think, of these actors to do anything. Like the PMF, we saw some rather silly footage on the internet in the following days, later this week, of PMF fighters manning anti-aircraft guns and trying to shoot down U.S. aircraft. That's not going to work, of course. But it's a show of, oh, we're doing something about this. We're trying to defend sovereignty and we're trying to fire back, to shoot back, to fight back. But I think it's more of a symbolic move because there's actually very limited capacity to do anything in terms of preventing future attacks. But by saying this, I think Sudani is trying to win some points with the PMF and saying that I'm on your side. Because at the end of the day, he needs these folks politically. Let's not forget that Falih al-Fayyad is actually a member of Prime Minister Sudan's electoral coalition and of his parliamentary bloc. So these are his political allies, as well as being part of his security establishment. And he has to, I think, appease that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, also at the same time, politically, I just imagine that when you have like the incident that happened in Habaniya, where it wasn't just PMF fighters, but also Iraqi security soldiers, right, who were killed, that doesn't play well. So there's, more anger among just the Iraqi public.
Indeed, and I think the government has also was noticing that, so they have basically said that we're summoning both the Iranian ambassador to Iraq and the chief of mission of the U.S. mission in Iraq, the Chargé, to deliver formal protests about all of these attacks, the attacks on the Peshmerga, the attacks and Habaniya, to make it clear that violations of Iraqi sovereignty are not acceptable, regardless of where they came from. But of course, these protests don't really carry much weight on the ground.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, just visually, like, I mean, it was astonishing when I was reading these reports. A-10 strafing attacks of those sites.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and these are allies. These are Iraqi soldiers that were probably trained by U.S. advisors at one point. So, how is the war affecting Iraq's economy and its relationships with neighboring states?
That's a good question. Let's start with the economy. I think we have mentioned this a lot in the past, and it's common knowledge that 90% of government revenue in Iraq comes from oil sales, and these oil sales have virtually stopped since the war began. Uh, Last week, Iraq was able to restart very limited exports of oil from the northern fields of Kirkuk via the Kurdistan region to Turkey, but at the volume of 200 to 250,000 barrels per day, and that's about 8% of what Iraq's exports used to be before the war. Meanwhile, all the exports from the south, from Basra, from all the big fields, they have been shut in. They have been suspended because of the situation with the Strait of Hormuz. So, because you can't export the oil and your storage tanks are filling up, Iraq earlier this week declared force majeure in several fields that are operated by foreign oil companies, and they have throttled production down to just 800,000 barrels per day. And that's basically an 80%, more than an 80% reduction from pre war levels. So the damage is really, really big to Iraq's budget, to Iraq's income. And even if exports from the north ramp up to 450 or even 650,000 barrels a day, the delta, the gap between needs, between demand and what revenue that these sales will generate is still going to be huge, and it's going to force Iraq, I think, to either delay or stop paying salaries to the public sector, employees, or start cannibalizing central bank reserves, and neither is a good option.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a quite a bleak quite a bleak situation right now financially for Iraq, and I think it's also important to mention the situation with electricity is actually quite worrying right now, because when you throttle down oil production, You also impact gas production because much of Iraq's gas production is associated gas, which comes to the surface with the oil. So no oil, no gas.
Uh-huh.
And Iran has also suspended or
Uh,
slashed
yeah,
its
yeah.
gas exports to Iraq significantly. Iraq used to get about 20 million cubic meters a day from Iran. Now it was halted for a few days. It restarted at 5 million cubic meters a day. So the grid right now is producing about 14,000 megawatts, which is about half of the pre-war levels. And this is manageable for Iraq right now during this spring season. But if this drags on into April and May and June, then that's going to be really nasty.
Wow. And just, I mean, that's the concern, of course, is when it gets to the point where also even government salaries aren't being paid, and it's such a large public sector in Iraq, that's going to create even more instability. So let me ask about escalation across border with militias launching attacks on neighboring states, and how is that playing out?
Yeah, that's another troubling, I think, development this week. The militias, as at the same time that they have been targeting places where U.S. presence is suspected, where they have been striking targets in the Kurdistan region and elements of the Iraqi security forces that they don't necessarily like the intelligence service. They have also been launching cross-border attacks at some of Iraq's neighbors. We saw this week an attack on a base in northeast Syria, Kharab al-Jir, which reportedly the U.S. military had actually evacuated in late February. Before that, we saw attacks on Kuwait and Jordan and drone strikes that originate from Iraq into Saudi Arabia. So there was an interesting development with several Arab countries: Kuwait, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan. Um, I forgot, maybe there was one other country who they issued a joint statement urging the Iraqi government to do something to rein in the attacks, to stop the attacks. They were rather diplomatic but firm. They said, "We value relations with Iraq. We want to have good relations with Iraq, but this is unacceptable. And make no mistake that we will take whatever steps necessary to defend ourselves and to defend our territory." So that's I think, a very, very concerning turning point, perhaps for Iraq's relations with Arab states, which have taken really so long to bring back and revive and rebuild after the all the damage that was done to Iraq's relations, especially during the government of the two terms of Nur al-Maliki. It took a lot of effort from 2017, I think, 2015, 2017, until now, almost a decade of rebuilding, and all that is being jeopardized right now.
Well, that's not good. So I want to kind of start thinking about what might happen next. I mean, as I opened the program, we talked about the preparations for a potential ground offensive, and so we could see things escalate much further in terms of the war on Iran and how that affects the region. So looking ahead, what are the most likely scenarios from here, and how close are we to seeing a much wider war?
Well, in terms of scenarios, I think, war is complicated, and there are infinite, I think, possibilities in how a military operation or a war could unfold. But I think if we're looking at some of the indicators that you pointed out earlier, Eric, about the deployment of the Marines and the 82nd Airborne. And we're looking at small, specialized units for the most part, potentially amphibious or airborne operations. That indicates that we could see a worst case scenario, perhaps, of limited ground operations to either try to secure the Strait of Hormuz or to invade and occupy Khark Island or Kharg Island, which is where 90% of Iran's oil exports are handled on their way out of the Strait of Hormuz. And we are already seeing reports that Iran is heavily fortifying these areas, planting anti-personnel, anti-equipment mines, putting in additional dispersed defenses, manpads, small portable air defense guided missiles, and things like that. So a high intensity conflict in those areas could lead both to potentially large casualties on both sides, but could also lead to long term damage, not just to Iran's vital energy infrastructure, but to its neighbors, because Iran is likely to lash out and retaliate and use its ability to attack the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure of the UAE, of Kuwait, of Qatar as a pressure point, as leverage to force the US to come to terms. So that's probably one of the worst case scenarios that we can see right now. I think it's unlikely that we're going to see a countrywide invasion of Iran. That's probably beyond what anyone in their right mind would be thinking. The I think the on the other end of the scenarios is, and we're also seeing signs of that in the announcements that are coming out of the White House and President Trump, is to, if you can't get what you want, look at what you have and call it victory. So you spin the situation, you uh, call it victory, you declare what you have accomplished already as a match for the objectives that that you had initially designed for the war, intended for the war, and then continue to seek negotiated settlement with Iran. Um, and I think that kind of possibility is raising concerns among some of the neighbors, the Gulf states, who are worried that if if Iran indeed is starting to gain leverage, to gain a better bargaining situation with, as time is showing that this is a quick victory for the US is not possible, and that the cost is going to grow, the economic pain on the world is going to grow, then Iran could actually be in a position where it could end up with more leverage and more really just better off than it had been prior to the conflict. Not better off, of course, like there is the cost of war, but in terms of its power position within the region and what concessions it can get from the US or from Israel, or it can extract from its neighbors. I think whatever we're going to see is probably going to involve some elements of these scenarios.
There is a perception, and you're seeing more and more reports, this perception that Iran is quote unquote winning this conflict, that the Strait of Hormuz, its ability to just through with a few drones from time to time to, shut down the straits, that puts Iran in a strong position in relation to the rest of the region. And I think that's why we're seeing that reaction from Saudi Arabia and from Arab states. By the way, in terms of Saudi Arabia, I mean, the New York Times was reporting that Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman has kind of, he put out there, and I mean, this is like clearly playing to President Trump, a historic opportunity to reshape the Middle East, and is urging President Trump to consider seizing Iranian energy infrastructure, so that would be Karg Island, and even claiming that, yeah, there might be a spike in oil prices, but it would be temporary, which is quite astonishing when you think about it, because I mean, we already have seen the damage that's been done to Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG complex, the gas fields there, where I think it's the damage is at least has cut 17 to 20%. And they're saying that it will take 3 to 5 years to restore full capacity for those gas fields. I mean, that's the difference between a disruption and actual damage. And if there's a battle to take Karg Island, you would anticipate that that would take that offline, and then there'd be retaliatory strikes.
Right, right. That is the risk. That is a real risk.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to close with just a few thoughts and then give you an opportunity as well, Omar. But I mean, it's I think the danger that I always see with these wars is that we've seen with smart bombs, precision strikes, you can have 90% tactical success, but at the same time fail strategically. And I think that's the real danger because this political outcome that's desired, you're trying to address the nuclear threat coming from Iran. And, at this point, the nuclear material has been dispersed. And you're talking about, that the only solution is regime change, a political outcome, very complicated. Clearly, you can't do that from 20,000 feet with bombs. All of that, I think, you know, creates this danger that we can see this further escalation going up the escalation ladder. So I do hope that you're right that we'll see, the decision. I mean, everything is being put on the table for the president to make a decision to go to start a ground war should he want to do that. I think the one thing that I would push back on what you were saying, Omar, is that while I agree, nobody in their right mind would think that the US is going to try to carry out a ground offensive to get all the way to Tehran. At the same time, Iran will see any foothold as an existential threat. It already sees this war as an existential threat. And the difference between the US waging a war of choice versus Iran seeing it as an existential threat, the Iranian regime. That's part of why there's kind of this mismatch in terms of risk tolerance, what is seen as acceptable costs, as well as an asymmetric. It's asymmetrical when you're talking about like these THAAD interceptor missiles that cost what? How many millions of dollars, Omar? I mean, 10 million or more per interceptor versus a
Have an exact number, but they are expensive and they take a long time to produce, and they're definitely becoming coming in short supply.
Yeah, and then with Iran, a drone, these Shahad drones cost what, maybe $10,000 to build. I know that at 1 year, just in 1 year in the Russian war against Ukraine, Russia used something like 54,000 drones. So it gives you an idea of the industrial capacity that we could see in terms of building drones and prolonging this conflict for a very long time. So with all that in mind, clearly it's going to be difficult to find a way to end this war politically as well for President Trump. Clearly, you're going to have to negotiate with Iran, and Iran does seem to be in a stronger position today than they were when there was a deal on the table, February 27th.
I think when the White House went into this war, it had in mind a short excursion and quick gains. And looking at the administration's record, it doesn't really have that much of strategic patience for any project it starts, and kind of like always moving on to the next shiny object. So that's one thing that tells me that when you hear the president saying, "Well, there was one Ayatollah and now there's different Ayatollah," I call that regime change. It kind of sounds like the White House trying to move on, but at the same time, you can always count on people to do stupider things that you think they're capable of, and getting themselves into deeper trouble than they are already in. So, you know, hoping for de-escalation and for a return a to a negotiated settlement, but we should also be on guard that this could get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's the human costs. We're especially seeing that in Lebanon. Of course, we're seeing it on the ground in Iran. And then how it can destabilize Iraq. That's a danger that we're going to continue to follow. And you can rely on us week to week with our Isham reports. As we've discussed today, Iraq is no longer a bystander. It's becoming a battleground with rising risks of internal fragmentation and a wider regional war. So you can look to us at enablingpeace.org with our weekly Isham reports. We'll continue to report on these developments that are happening and how it's impacting things in Iraq. So thank you so much for joining us for your Iraq briefing. Masalama.
Assalamu.